tutorial, I want to take the time to show you how you can easily insert a zipper into a 3/4 opening on any garment. That means you could do this in the front of a hoodie, you could insert a zipper into a pocket, you can even modify a current pattern that you already have or even a garment you already have and insert a zipper in the front of the garment. How cool is that? Well, I recognize that zippers can cause anxiety for a lot of sewers. It's one of those you either feel confident or you just aren't quite sure what you're doing. So I hope that this will be a solid resource for you in learning this technique. I have some great tips and tricks that I use in my sewing that I think will make this a seamless process. Now, before we get started, I want to share a little story with you. So several years ago, I had an intern working in my studio, and she had recently graduated from college in fashion design. And one day, she just all of a sudden just looked like, frustrated. And I said her name, and I said, well, what's the matter? And she stopped and said, I just am not good as you. And I said, well, I'm over 20 years older than you, number one, and I've had many more life experiences when it comes to sewing. And her problem was she was trying to sew a zipper and it just wasn't going very well. And so I told her the same thing that I tell all of my students, and this really reigns true with any skill. I told her, and I have a bucket of, this is my working bucket of zippers that I have in my studio, and there's just a couple, and there's many more over in my storage area. But the whole idea is, I said, go to the bucket of zippers and grab 30 zippers. Now, that can seem like a scary task to anybody, but what I said was grab 30 zippers or grab one a day and get a scrap piece of fabric and sew the zipper into the scrap piece of fabric. It takes 5 minutes or under. If you mess up, I said don't rip it out, just set it aside, put a number on it. The next day, pick up a new zipper, sew the zipper in. The moral of the story is that by 30 zippers, by the end of the month, which was my challenge to her, I said your 30th zipper will be far better than the first one you ever did. And so anytime you're sewing a zipper, and especially if you're doing a new zipper technique, what I would recommend is sew a sample first before you try to put that zipper in your actual fashion fabric and fashion garment. There's nothing like experimenting on your finished project. We should never do that in sewing. So I just wanted to take a moment before we get into the ins and outs of doing a 3/4 zipper just to share that idea for you. It works really well, and honestly, it's probably one of the best tips that I can share with you is sample anything you don't know how to do, don't practice on your final project, and you will be much more confident in your sewing. Well, let's take a look at the steps in inserting the zipper and how it's going to work, and I'm sure and confident that you too will have great success in creating 3/4 zippers. The first thing we want to do when we are inserting a zipper into a 3/4 center front opening is to determine the zipper length and mark our fabric precisely. Now, in our Nancy's Notions wardrobe builder video on the fashion hoodie, we feature this exact technique, the 3/4 opening zipper. So let's take a look at that pattern for that particular design, talk about how we mark our fabrics and the possibility of being able to apply this technique to patterns that don't have this as a feature, as well as maybe ready-to-wear clothing that is hanging in our wardrobe and we might want to just repurpose it and kind of update. Okay, so you can adjust this zipper to be however long or short you want. Now, I have a scrap piece of fabric right here. I highly recommend when you are learning a new technique, practice on a scrap piece of fabric before you try to do this in your fashion garment. I think as sewers, we often experiment on the finished product rather than taking 5 minutes to just really practice something before we apply it to our garment. So this is going to be a real quick, thorough tutorial, but once you sit down to do it, these zippers take rarely 5 minutes to do. So a great technique, not difficult. It's all about how we mark our pattern. Okay, as I mentioned in our fashion hoodie wardrobe builder video, we use the McCall's 8143 pattern, and it has some markings on the center front. Now, this pattern piece is cut on the fold. So in order to insert a zipper in here, we do have to cut an opening in the garment. Now that is not the first step, okay? But we are going to be cutting, and that's why I suggest practicing first so that you do not mess up on your actual fashion fabric. Well, let's look a little further at this pattern design. There is a broken stitching line that is the stitching line for applying our zipper. It is 1/4 of an inch from the very center front edge of this pattern. That means when we cut this on the fold and we mark the center front, we are going to have a stitching line 1/4 of an inch on either side of the center front. Now there are 3 little dots here that indicate a medium, a small, an extra small. If you're working with a large or an extra large size pattern, they will be marked accordingly. I rarely pay attention to these markings. The cool thing about this technique is you really can make a long zipper opening, you can make a short zipper opening, and customize this to the look of the fabric that you're working with. If you're doing a beautiful silk dress, for example, and maybe you want just a short little rhinestone zipper opening, you can put a short little zipper in there and have it look very classy and formal. Of course, this has a little more of an athletic look to it. We can include decorative zippers like this one, which is shorter. Sometimes the length of your zipper may be determined by the length of the zipper that you're working with. Some of these decorative zippers, here's a real cute little one as well, that's as long as this zipper is available. So that would definitely limit how long of a zipper we're going to use. I'm going to be illustrating with a much longer zipper for a couple of reasons, but again, just kind of be aware of your zipper length and the ability to adjust this according to the project that you're working on. I mentioned that you can apply these markings to purchase clothing. So maybe you've got a great sweater or sweatshirt in your closet that is just kind of boring and you want to dress it up maybe with a decorative zipper. This is a great opportunity to do that. All right, well, what we're going to do is we want to put some markings on our fabric so that we have a gauge of where we're going to stitch and where the parts of the zipper go. Okay. Let's move the pattern out of the way. Here's our decorative zipper. Okay, so I have a few tools. I have marking chalk, and then I also have this great clover roller, which is a really great tool for zippers because it's so precise. And this technique is all about how accurate you mark your fabric. That's going to make or break whether you have puckers and how things lay, hands down. So a hem gauge is also a tool I'm going to use, and sometimes I'll go and then connect the dots with a larger ruler. All right, well, what we're going to do on our fabric here is I'm going to draw a line down the center front. This is not the entire pattern piece. Again, it's just a sample fabric, which makes it a really inexpensive way to practice your skill. Now, I did use some wax chalk to draw a long line here, just so that it's a little darker for you to see. But that clover chalkener that has the wheel on it really is a great one for working with zippers. All right, so we have a line on our fabric, and this is just going to indicate the center front. Now, we want to determine how long of a zipper we're going to be sewing with. And I'm not going to actually pick an actual length right now, so I'm just going to kind of draw a line here. But on your actual fabric, whatever the length of your zipper is from the top of your fabric to where the zipper stop is going to be, that is where you want to draw a line across the bottom. Now, I'm going to draw a line here that's much larger than needed. So this obviously is much more than we would need. You would really just need a short little line and very faint. It does not have to be dark. Most of these chalk tools will erase or with water come out of our fabric. If you are using a silk, then sometimes I'll go in and hand baste this rather than putting chalk on the fabric. So just know that you have a couple options there. The big thing that I want to point out here is this. It's imperative that this is a right
angle, okay? And that when you draw this on here, you are not angling the line. It really needs to be a perfect right angle, because that's going to make sure that the length on one side of the line is the same as on the other side of the line, so that when you stitch your zipper in there, you don't have a little pucker on one side and then none on the other. Okay, so I just really want to point that out, that is really probably the biggest thing that I see when people and students have issues with this pattern. Okay, well, let's get going here. I have jumped ahead a little and I put some of the fusible interfacing on here to stabilize. And that also is another key way to ensure that you don't have a zipper that stretches if you happen to be working with a knit. But even non-knit fabrics, like your regular woven fabrics, once you cut this open, you do run the risk of stretching that opening. So that little bit of interfacing is really going to stabilize that. It's not really going to show through. You only need just a little bit wider than the area that you are working. Okay. Well, now we've got our right angle on the bottom, and let's grab a hem gauge. And the next thing that we want to do is we want to mark the stitching line. If you remember back to our pattern that we saw just a minute ago, it had a dotted line, 1/4 of an inch to either side of the stitching line. And so that's what we're going to do here. So if I line up my ruler, and I'm carefully lining up the base of that. This is one area where, because we just don't have a really long length of the ruler, that I may take my actual long ruler and then kind of go back and just do a final connect the dots. Okay, and then also that allows me to make sure that that's consistent from top to bottom. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. The other thing you can do is you can place your large ruler here and hold it, and then you can place your hem gauge on that center front line, and then you can check, which I like a consistent line, so that's probably a little more of a go-to for me. And then you can go ahead and draw your line. So you now have 3 lines on here. Okay, well, the next thing that we want to do is that we are going to go to our sewing machine. We are going to stitch down the outer line. We're going to stop right on the bottom line. We're going to stitch across, and then we're going to go up. You do not need to stitch the center front line, because that's where we're going to cut the pattern. But what this does is it's basting or stay stitching, so that also it doesn't stretch at the bottom corner. When we do go to open this up, it's going to secure that whole opening for the zipper. So again, this whole zipper is really all about taking the time to mark the pattern in order to have better success. All right, I've gone to my sewing machine and I have done a basting or an anchor stay stitch down one side, across the bottom, and back up. Now I've used matching thread, but if you look closely, you can still see a little residue from my chalk roller. If I took water to this, that would dissolve, but I've left that on there just so you can use that as a reference. Okay, the next part of the zipper, I think you are going to love. I'm using a nice bright white zipper intentionally because I want you to really be able to see what I'm doing when I'm lining up the zipper with the fabric. These are just some techniques that I use. I'm a big fan of putting any markings that are going to help your sewing line up and be more accurate. So I'm going to share that with you here. Okay, well, on our particular pattern, we know that we have a line going across the bottom. A little farther up, and I base my placement of this next line on the length of the zipper. If I have a really short zipper, I might do it in the middle. If I have something really long, I might do this particular marking a little closer to the bottom edge. And I'll show you why in just a moment. Now remember that right angle, it's so important. So I'm going to go ahead and place this on here I'm going to draw an exaggerated line. So you certainly do not need to draw a line all the way across the fabric. If it just barely goes across your zipper opening area and it's kind of faint, that is ideal, but at least you can see what we are doing here. And I'm just going to go ahead and make that a little darker, again, just so you can see. Now, often when I'm ready to put a zipper in a garment, the first thing I'll do is actually just lay the zipper on the garment. It gives me an idea of what it's going to look like, where it's going to line up, and things like that. Now, a common mistake with zippers is that as we go as sewers, we just line up the top of the zipper with the top of the opening and we stitch down or up or whatever. That's okay, but I want to point out that the zipper stop that is at the top of the zipper, if you look at the tape that goes beyond that, sometimes they're not even from one side to the other, or if the zipper stops don't line up perfectly. Matter of fact, this one right here looks like it's off just a scant amount. It's not really enough to worry about, but what might happen is if I have one zipper tape that's much longer on one side than the other, then it's not going to lay straight. So for example, if I were to trim this off, and you can see one is distinctively longer than the other. So I can't line up this edge and then go over and line that edge up either. So whenever you're working with a zipper, if you plan to use that top edge, take a ruler and cut right across there. I'm just eyeballing it right here, but you actually want to take a ruler and cut evenly so that now when you place that edge against the top of your garment, it is going to lay perfect and it won't cause any issues with how the zipper lays toward the bottom. All right, so you're asking me, Joy, what is this extra line that you have on the pattern? All right, we're almost there. Okay, so I'm working with a zipper that's quite a bit longer. Of course, follow any pattern that you're working with. In our Nancy's Notions Wardrobe Builder Fashion Hoodie pattern, there is actually a hood and a hood band, collar band that extends on the top edge of the fabric. And so when you place that zipper, the zipper actually goes beyond where the neck is on the pattern, if that makes sense. Reference that video. And so you're going to want to follow your pattern instructions. Sew any sort of collar or band to the top edge first before you insert your zipper. Otherwise, what happens is you put your zipper in and then you realize, oh dear, I have a collar to attach, and then the zipper doesn't go to the top of the collar. So pay attention to that. Okay, all right. Now for the line. One thing that I like to do is put additional markings on my zipper, as I've mentioned. Now, this particular zipper, I am going to line the top edge up with the top of the fabric, and so it extends far beyond the bottom edge of the zipper. Eventually, we're going to go and trim that off. Now, if you're new to sewing, you may not want to do that. You might want the bottom zipper stop to land just above the bottom edge of the zipper opening so that you don't have to stitch over top of any zipper teeth or anything across the bottom. But if you're a confident sewer and you have a longer zipper, you might know that you can shorten the zipper, put a new pin there, and it works the same way. Okay, so you're just going to decide that. Again, I mentioned that I am going to go ahead and line up the top of my zipper with the top of my fabric. So what I'm going to do now is, now that I've got that lined up, is I'm going to hold this very secure and I am going to put a mark, and I'm going to make this kind of dark to the point that I'm going to actually grab a different pencil that's a little darker, and I'm going to put a dot and I just use a pencil for this on either side, and then I'm going to go down to the bottom where I have the bottom zipper stop, or the bottom of the zipper length, or the bottom edge. All right, so if we look really close, we now have pencil markings on the zipper tape. This will not show. Your fabric is going to cover that. And again, I'm doing markings much darker here than you are going to need. in your sewing. This is just so that you can see it. But the great thing is we're ready to line this zipper up. And the reason why I do this is that when I go to sew, sometimes, you know, like I've mentioned couture sewing, or if you're using silk fabric and you want to baste something, have you ever sewn a zipper all the way in and then you realized, oh dear, I have to take the whole entire thing back out? So instead of doing the whole side of the zipper, it's a great idea to just stitch a small portion, maybe even baste it, check, and then if that looks great, you know that you've got the hard part, the bottom, nice and straight, and then you can go back and just you know, do a little back stitch there and then continue and do the top part of the zipper. This is all on the inside, so if you insert the zipper in 2 steps, it's not going to hurt anything. Now, there are many ways and techniques for inserting zippers, so this is just one, but I think it's just so clear and straightforward, and it marks very easily, and my students love it. All right, I'm doing the scary part right now. I am cutting open my zipper front opening. Now I'm going to cut to about 1/4 of an inch from the bottom of the zipper, and just so we can see, I'm just going to make that just a little darker. All right, so now what I want to do is I'm going to angle toward, to, but not through my stay stitching that I have in there. So if we look really closely, there's a tiny little triangle piece there, all right? And we now have the zipper opening. Now, the general process for inserting this zipper at the machine is as follows. You're gonna unzip the zipper, okay? And watch very closely as soon as I line this up. Okay, all right. So the general process for the zipper is, here's how it lays nice and flat. You're going to take one side of the zipper and you're going to do right sides together. So this is the right side, the side that I put that marking on. I'm going to flip that over and I'm going to lay that marking flat on the fabric, and I'm going to line that up with the line that I have right here. Now these little guys right here are applique pins, and no, they're not just for quilters. Applique pins, I think they're about 3/4 of an inch long. They're very tiny, which works to our advantage when we're doing something like a zipper, because they don't shift around and they're not really in the way. So I'm going to take a little applique pin and pin that. Let me move my hand out of the way. So I have a little pin there. It's tiny, it's pliable, it holds it in place. So as I'm sewing the zipper, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to sew down and I'm going to stop right on that line, and then I'll be able to flip that portion of the zipper to the inside, and it'll be attached. Okay, now I know some people think like, don't sew over pins. The idea in not sewing over pins is to not ruin your sewing machine, but sometimes as you're sewing, it is 100% appropriate to put the needle down, turn the hand wheel, and you can actually then stitch over, so to speak, the pin, remove it without any shifting. And this is one of those cases where if you want that zipper to go in nice and precise, that's what I would do. Hands down, you're going to have great success every time. All right, you're going to repeat that on the other side. So we're going to rock the zipper tape right sides together, stitch down, and we're going to stop at the bottom. And then the next thing we're able to do is we're going to zip this up. We're going to tuck the tail into the inside. We're going to stitch that little tab down and then do some top stitching, and your 3/4 zipper is finished. It is precise and accurate, and you are going to love it.
We're at our machine, we're ready to insert the zipper. We've done a lot of great markings on here, so this should just ensure that we have great results and we can avoid using our seam ripper. Okay, well, I mentioned that there's a tighter weave in the zipper tape here, and it happens to be 1/2 of an inch from the edge, so that's gonna conveniently fall on our 1/2 inch basting stitch or stabilizing stitch that we have. So we're going to go ahead and stitch down the seam. I am going to go ahead and do the full length, but as I mentioned, if you just want to kind of anchor a portion of your zipper, especially if it's much longer, then this reference point just is a great way to also prevent your fabric from stretching and lining everything up. I have the zipper foot on my machine, and I do want to point out that one mistake that I think happens in a zipper foot is that sometimes we're trying to stitch so close to the teeth. It's okay if there's a tiny little gap between the teeth and the zipper tape. You do have to have space in there for the zipper to be able to be pulled up and down. Now here I'm coming to that little pin. I can remove it, or I'm going to take my foot off the wheel and just kind of hold my fabric here and turn the hand wheel and go over that pin. I do like to do that. I know it's kind of frowned upon sewing over pins, but if you're careful and you just turn the hand wheel, then now I can kind of reach back there and pull that out, and I don't have to mess with anything. And also these applique pins are great for that. They're not real thick, so unlike a heavier pin or a quilting pin or something that it's a little more challenging. All right, so I'm coming up to the bottom. I need literally one stitch. I'm gonna hit reverse and pull that off. And I have one of those little pins there, so I'm gonna take that out. All right, and you'll see that what happens is this rolls, if I can get a hold of it there, it rolls to the inside. So that's what we're looking for. All right, so now we're on the other side, and I just like to kind of hold the zipper so I know that I'm not twisting this the wrong way. So I know that everything down this length matches up. Once it's in, it will point that direction, but since I need to sew it, I'm gonna flip it towards me, right sides together, and then I'm gonna take one of my little applique pins, and I have that reference mark on here, so I'm gonna put a little pin in the upper part. I know that that's gonna allow that part of the zipper to line up, and then I'm gonna take a pin down here closer to the bottom and make sure that my teeth are lining up there as well. There we go. Put a little pin in there. There we go. And also that pin should run in that same line as what I have there, so I know that that's right where that needs to be. Okay, so a couple things here. I personally don't change the position of my zipper foot. I like to just flip it around, start at the bottom and work my way up. However, if you want to start at the top and work your way down, then you're going to need to pop that off and flip it to the other side. Okay, so I just eyeball it here really quick and make sure, again, I don't have one that has several stitches beyond the other. It's so important that these are in the same plane. All right, we have stitched our zipper down both sides of the 3/4 opening. The next part is a little awkward, especially if you have a really short tail. I'm going to illustrate this on a longer zipper that we're going to trim off. But what you're going to want to do is to start zipping up the zipper, and that seems natural, but what are we going to do with this long tail? So before you get the zipper all the way up, what you want to do is leave a couple inches and kind of roll the excess underneath. And it's kind of like when you're teaching someone to tie their shoes. So you're going to pull this to the inside, and then before the zipper tab gets tucked all the way under, you want to grab the tail from the bottom side and the zipper tab from the top and just kind of wiggle it and rock it a little bit, and then that's going to give you this flat area at the bottom. And if you look real close, you can see where I have the little mark on there, but that's going to lay nice and flat, which is exactly what we want. Now, on the underside of the zipper, we're gonna tuck this little triangle piece to the inside. So let me do that now. And then what we're gonna wanna do is stitch across that on our sewing machine, and then that's gonna hold that secure. The last step would be if you want to do some top stitching around there. Let's go back to our beautiful blue
hoodie from Wardrobe Builder, you'll see on this one that I actually ran this through my cover stitch. So if you look closely, you'll see 3 rows of stitching. You don't have to be that decorative. You can use just a single row of stitching and go all the way around as a top stitch. You can omit the top stitching, do contrasting thread, whatever you would like to do to finish off that zipper, and you have completed your 3/4 zipper. Congratulations. Now remember, the best tip on any new technique is to practice on some sample fabric so then you can go to your actual garment and have seamless success.